The Heartland's take on impeachment. Joining us on Columbus on the Record this week, Jackie Borchert, Columbus Bureau Chief for the Cincinnati Enquirer, Kathy Kandinsky, State House reporter for the Columbus Dispatch, Herb Asher, OSU political scientist, and Marianne Sharkey, public affairs consultant. The possible impeachment of President Trump moved into its next phase this week. The House Judiciary Committee began its work on allegations the president abused his power to get Ukraine to launch investigations into his political opponents. First up, legal opinions on if impeachment is warranted.
If you don't impeach a president who has done what this president has done, then what you're saying is it's fine to go ahead and do this again.
If we cannot impeach a president who abuses his office for personal advantage, we no longer live in a democracy. We live in a monarchy, or we live under a dictatorship.
I'm concerned about lowering impeachment standards to fit a paucity of evidence and an abundance of anger. I believe this impeachment not only fails to satisfy the standard of past impeachments, but would create a dangerous precedent for future impeachments.
Herb Asher, a lot of Republicans, president supporters say that folks out here in the heartland, people outside of Washington, don't really care about this stuff. Are they right?
Only partially right. There are people, if you talk to your neighbors and friends, now we don't talk with the average citizen every day, people are following it, but they're still not quite focused in on it the same way you might get the impression if you watch Fox or CNN or whatever. But it's out there. But remember, we're still now into the next stage of the process. We're not yet into the Senate, but I think what the Republicans are hoping for is making the argument, two arguments. One, it doesn't reach the standard of sufficient guilt for impeachment, and people really don't care and all of that. And it's interesting because Ohio is sort of an interesting player here. We have Jim Jordan, our congressman, who has been the fiercest defender of the president. And many people on both sides of the aisle, the Republicans privately, they wouldn't say it publicly about him, would say the man is actually blind. He's blind to Russian interference. He's blind to the damage he's done to the intelligence services. He's blind to any flaws that the president has. And he's been blind to other things that happened on the OSU campus. But the flip side here is we have Senator Portman, who has said, well, it's not really yet to the standard of, and this is when he was a representative, voted for impeachment of Bill Clinton.
Yeah, Portman has said it is wrong. The phone call was wrong. But even today, he said again, it doesn't rise to the level of removal from office and impeachment.
Well, they've changed their standards, as Herb is pointing out. I mean, when we went through with Bill Clinton, he basically lied in a civil deposition. And, they ended up, at least impeaching him in the House. They didn't convict him in the Senate. But Herb's correct. If you look at the history of what Ohio has done and Ohio congressmen have done, the Republicans were with Clinton, voted against Clinton on facts that are a lot more wobbly than this.
Democrats voted with Bill Clinton in 98, 99, so it was as partisan there. Some defected.
It's been interesting watching some of these hearings, especially this week where you had some players who were around in the Clinton administration, like Jerry Nadler, and we also had Brad Wenstrup from Cincinnati area, and it was interesting to see. They were bringing up some of those comments from the '90s without bringing up their own comments from the '90s, which were opposite. So that's been interesting to go back and kind of see that.
Clinton committed perjury. Donald Trump lies, but he doesn't lie under oath, and his lawyers will never let him.
That's because his lawyers won't let him.
One's a crime and one's not.
I think one question to really ask is, if it were reversed. Sort of similar fact pattern, but Hillary Clinton was the president. Where would Republicans be on this?
Where would Democrats be on that?
Well, it's hyper-partisan now, and it really comes down to that. But this is no cliffhanger. We all know how this is going to end up, right? In the Senate, the Republicans are not going to vote to impeach.
If the facts
or not
don't
going to
change.
convict.
Yeah, if
the facts don't change.
I mean, Jonathan Turley, he was painted as a Republican. He's not a Republican. He was called by the Republicans because he's a strict legal guy on certain issues, including free speech and things.
Right.
But does he have a point that Democrats are rushing this? They have this false deadline of getting it done before the primaries and caucuses begin when They could fight to get John Bolton to testify. They could fight to get transcripts from other phone calls the president has made.
The flip side of that is then they will be accused of dragging it out. And you've had actually from the administration comments along both lines. You know, they're dragging it out. No, they're rushing it through. So no matter what the Democrats, remember the Republican objections here are always going to be on process. There are relatively few people who are defending the president's actions. And again, the president really has done a number of things that would fall under abuse of power and obstruction and all of that. The question becomes, does it rise to the level of impeachment?
I would think to the Republicans, the most troublesome issue has to be obstruction of justice. They have to look at it as an institution for the Senate. And do you issue these subpoenas and you have an administration who is clearly stonewalling them? And to me, even the Senate Republicans who think, well, maybe this doesn't rise or this doesn't rise, they have to look at this obstruction of justice because basically what they're doing is thumbing their nose at Congress and saying, you guys don't count. We don't care what you
That's
what
the
you
most
think.
concerning precedent, I think.
Jackie.
I just need to correct myself. I said Brad Wenstrup a few minutes ago, and I meant Steve Shabbat.
Okay.
It was wrong. Southwest Ohio Republican.
No problem. The Democratic field for president continues to shrink. We are down to 15 candidates. This week, Pennsylvania Congressman Joe Sestak and Montana Governor Steve Bullock dropped out. Their withdrawals were greatly overshadowed by California Senator Kamala Harris's announcement.
So here's the deal, guys. My campaign for president simply does not have the financial resources to continue and the financial resources we need to continue. I'm not a billionaire. I can't fund my own campaign. And as the campaign has gone on, it has become harder and harder to raise the money we need to compete.
Marianne Schucke, what happened to Senator Harris? She was one of the top-tier candidates early on.
She was a top-tier candidate. I actually think that she blew it in the very first debate when she went after Joe Biden. And while she got all these laudatory comments right afterwards, a lot of people started looking into it. A lot of the facts weren't quite accurate. It was a voluntary busing in Berkeley. She clearly had that line all set up. They had T-shirts ready to go. They had social media ready to go. And as people looked at that, they said, wait a second. So they thought that was kind of a phony thing with her. I think it's hard for an African-American woman, frankly, to compete for president. It's hard for women, period. But then you put on the added issue of African-American women. I think she was a good candidate.
She also muddled somewhat on healthcare and healthcare reform and was pro and then anti Medicare for all or whatever. But I thought she was a very strong candidate. And I thought one of her strengths was that while she was an African-American woman, she was actually a candidate who could be judged on her record separate from race and gender. And she had a very good record. And she gave some of that up in terms of the mistakes that she made.
But she wasn't picking up support in the black community either.
That was a problem. And she never really had any clear expectations. She never lived up to expectations. She never had any clear agenda. It was really hard to say what she was about when it came down to it.
And there were also, recent reports of some internal issues in her campaign with not having kind of a clear mission and some clear objectives of what they were going for, a plan even, very simply put. And it was a big operation. She had a lot of field, kind of big field operations in these early states. And, to her credit, after she stepped out, she did go and flew around the country and visited with these campaign volunteers and staffers.
Yeah. The first time was when she pulled all of her money out of New Hampshire and South Carolina and focused just on Iowa. That's always a bad sign when that happens, when a campaign starts retrenching. But you've seen other campaigns regroup after that. John McCain's campaign in 2008 was on fumes. He was flying coach, and he bounced back. She, by her early withdrawal before a vote was cast, does she help her chances of being somebody's VP nominee? Would Joe Biden pick her as his?
He said he would this week. He said, you bet.
I think Joe, if he thought she was going to really help him, he would definitely pick her. I think he'd let that go. He's not the kind of guy in his public life who holds grudges forever.
Yeah. No. And if he were elected and she were not the running mate, I could see him asking her to be the Attorney General of the United States.
Michael Bloomberg, a lot of ads on TV. I think all weekend long we saw Michael Bloomberg ads. Is it having an impact? He's at, 3%, I guess, last poll I saw, nationally.
He's got the money, obviously. He can self-finance.
And they're good ads. Yeah. I mean, they're actually telling you about who he is, and they're a minute ad in many cases, and they're actually interesting. Now, whether they have any impact, that's a different question, but it's interesting that there's the purchase in Ohio. Is the purchase as heavy in Cleveland and Cincinnati as it is here? Because in central Ohio, it's been tremendous.
Well, and I know I talked to some friends in Michigan, and they've been seeing them up there as well. So he's saturating areas that haven't seen a lot of presidential political activity necessarily.
Kathy, do you see him catching on here in Ohio, Michael Bloomberg?
Not really. It seems like he jumped in too late. I mean, it just seems like he jumped in too late, and I'm not sure Ohio is as impressed with the, New York mayor as other people out east might be. I think they're more in line with a folksy Joe Biden, or I just don't see him catching fire.
For the reporters on this panel, I find it troublesome that he's telling Bloomberg News that they cannot cover him. How do you cover the presidential campaign and not cover him?
Yeah. Well, they can cover him, they just can't write anything bad.
Yeah, well, great.
That's a huge problem.
Yeah, it is. All right, Attorney General Dave Yost says he has a plan to make sure any opioid settlement money is spent to fight drugs, change the state constitution. As the Dispatch first reported, the plan would have voters decide the proposed amendment in March. According to the Dispatch, the amendment would split the money 3 ways. Local governments would get some would go to a new opioid crisis recovery foundation. The goal of the amendment would be to keep politicians from spending money on projects unrelated to the opioid crisis or drug addiction. Kathy Kandinsky, this seems like a pretty bold move to change the state constitution to tell lawmakers how to spend money.
Absolutely. Tell lawmakers how to spend money, keep lawmakers out of the money, but the lawmakers need to pass this to get it on the ballot. So figure that one out. Riddle me that. There's a lot of challenges with this. First of all, the first probably big hurdle on this is the time frame. They've got like 10 days to get this passed through the legislature. That's a really heavy lift. I mean, it can be done, but it's going to be difficult. And they got to get the legislator to go along with it. And that also is a heavy lift. The governor says he's not supportive of it, not yet anyway.
What's the incentive, Jackie, for lawmakers in this?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
This seems like this appeases some folks, especially public health folks who have been kind of, the canary in the coal mine saying, look, back at the tobacco master settlement, the legislature here and in other states got a hold of that money and they spent it on things that were not related to tobacco prevention and cessation. And so we don't want that to happen again. This idea of an independent foundation is not anything new. If you talk to public health officials, a couple months ago, Terry DeMio, my colleague in Cincinnati, and I looked into this issue, and a foundation seems to be pretty palatable, but there's a lot of details there about who would be on this, who would be in control of the foundation, how much power do they have, what are they paid, who selects them. I mean, there's a lot of those little details, and every time we have a constitutional amendment on the ballot, it's those little details that kind of destroy it, make or break it.
Local officials will be giving up, power.
Yeah.
They'd be turning power over to this foundation and not knowing what kind of input they're going to have on the foundation. So I think it's a tough sell.
Marianne, you worked for Governor Taft
Yes.
when the tobacco money was being spent on other things, school construction, a lot of other things. What were those discussions like? And is there any regret from the former governor and members of his administration that they did use that money for other things?
Well, the first thing I have to say is I've been reading about how they fritter away this money, and I would hardly call school construction across the state, which has done wonderful things for every single school district that was eligible for it, and most of them were. They have brand new buildings. They become the heart of their community. The kids have clean environments. They have no asbestos, no lead paint. They're in good environments, and they're wired, these new schools. So I would say that they did not fritter away the money.
But it didn't go to its intended purpose, which is tobacco cessation and health care for tobacco victims.
Tobacco cessation was funded. That was later taken away.
Yeah.
Not during the Taft administration.
Okay.
There was a big chunk of money set aside for smoking cessation. But the subsequent legislatures, when they had no money and had to dig out of a hole, they found that a tempting fund.
The broader issue is when you get a new chunk of money that's supposed to be for a particular purpose, how do you guarantee that? And even though this wasn't a legal settlement per se, the Ohio lottery was sold on the basis of going to the schools. And one can demonstrate very clearly that for many years, a good portion of that money did not go to the schools. It helped fill other holes in the state budget. So this notion of a lockbox, and in fact, that was Al Gore's.
Social Security lockbox.
Yeah, so, yeah, that's right.
That's right.
But I'm not sure this is the right way to do it. But the broader issue, how do you guarantee that the money is used for the purpose for which it was won?
And that seems to be the goal of everyone right now. I mean,
Yeah.
that seems to be the goal of the local officials, certainly the governor's goal, and Dave Yost, who's proposing this, his goal as well.
We all think the local officials will spend the money on this stuff. Are there any requirements in this proposal that local governments can only spend the money on fighting drugs and can't spend it for schools or for, parks and sidewalk repair?
I don't know what it states precisely, but that's definitely the goal. They don't want it to be diverted to other uses.
Cuyahoga County just voted to set it aside in a separate account for this purposes, and they got a $127 million settlement so far.
When the next recession hits and you need money for
Yeah,
cops
well,
and firefighters, are they going
Yeah,
to
I
raise
know.
that account?
Good question, Mike.
And why wouldn't local governments want to? Why would local governments want to give that away, give that authority away? Wouldn't they rather just do that themselves? That's what I have a hard time seeing.
Clearly, they
So
would.
we're not optimistic this is going to go anywhere, at least not in March anyway.
2 thumbs down.
Yeah. All right, the debate over gun control has resumed at the State House. Advocates from both sides of the issue made their cases before a Senate committee this week over 2 different pieces of legislation. One bill backed by the governor includes modest increases in background checks and the expansion of the so-called pink slip law. Another, known as the Stand Your Ground bill, would eliminate a person's duty to retreat before using a gun in self-defense. It comes nearly 4 months after the Dayton mass shooting that left 9 dead, and Mike DeWine's promise to, quote, do something to bolster gun laws. Jackie Borchard, is there any indication that minds are being changed by this debate among lawmakers?
No.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to see that this pair of bills being discussed on the same day. The gun debate is not necessarily new to the State House. It's just always been in the terms of bills to relax restrictions on concealed carry permit holders. And so having this, the governor's bill, although it's been criticized as being a weaker proposal than what he initially had wanted to do, it's still a different direction than what they've always gone. So a lot of the things that are being said are not new, but in the context of the legislation are. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Stand Your Ground bill lingers just as long as the strong bill, the gun control bill, because I think the administration is looking at them a little bit in tandem. Governor DeWine has said he is not going to sign that bill, the Stand Your Ground bill, until his proposal gets some action.
He's using it as a bit of leverage to get his proposal passed. Kathy, what's the big stumbling block in the governor's proposal? Is it the voluntary background check proposal, which does increase possible liability for folks who sell guns to someone who shouldn't have one?
I think it's more of the pink slip. I mean, I think it's more of the restrictions.
That's the one that would expand the confinement ability
Right,
to
I think
substance abuse,
gun
not just
right-
mental illness.
Gun rights advocates have a real issue with that, with any kind of restrictions. The other ones, my understanding is it's not required. It's optional.
Yeah. But the negligent.
They've changed the legal standard on what your responsibility would be, though, and so the Second Amendment groups are saying that makes it a de facto mandatory background check, because if you don't have that, it will be much easier in court to prove that you had some role in whatever.
So if you sell a gun,
Yeah.
I've been working with Matt Dolan, so full disclosure, who's the sponsor of the bill. So if you sell your gun to someone, you can go get a $10 background check done by the county sheriff, and you will not be held liable for how that gun is used. That's a good thing for most of the sellers, I think.
What if the background
Well,
check comes back negative? You have to do the background check before you sell it?
Yeah, you have to do the background check,
So
yes.
before you sell it?
Yes,
Yeah.
and then also on the confinement, that's, people can come up and say, I have a family member who's dangerous, I have someone I'm concerned about, I have a neighbor who's crazy, I'm worried about, I see him with guns all the time, he doesn't handle them well. We see all this ammunition being piled up on the porch. You could, for various reasons, you can say, I'm really concerned about this guy. And then they can go in and do an evaluation.
Now, it requires the hearing first, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
which is different.
Herb, has this debate changed? I saw one quote saying this moves us a millimeter, but gun control advocates say we need to move a mile.
You know, if we get anything done, that'll be wonderful. But again, as we've talked about in previous shows, on certain kinds of issues, there's overwhelming support by Democrats, Republicans, and independents to do more with respect to gun safety and background checks and things like that. And the fact that we're having such difficulty overcoming the legislature to follow the mandate of what many people would want to see is very frustrating.
Is there any chance the filing deadline for the election is coming up in, I think, 10 days?
18th.
The 18th of December. So is there any chance that a Republican lawmaker who finds out that he or she does not have a primary opponent might be more willing to accept some gun restrictions? Is that a thinking down there? Or am
I haven't heard that, but perhaps.
I mean, it's coming up in the next few weeks.
Well, I mean, you know, Mike DeWine has a lot of, you know, things he can, you know, I mean, help raise money for him, make appearances for him. He can do a lot of things to behind the scenes saying, you know, get on board or, you know, I'm not going to help you, you know, do any fundraising.
Any indication he's willing to go to the mat on this, the governor?
Well, he's put himself pretty far out on this one. If I were Governor DeWine, I mean, the majority of Ohioans agree that we need to do something.
Right, no question.
Yeah.
All right. Governor DeWine does not want to deal with those plastic shopping bags. At least he doesn't want to deal with state government getting in the way of local bans on the bags. DeWine says a bill that would ban local bans on plastic grocery bags would be bad, to use the alliteration. Jackie Borchard, is the governor more worried about home rule, or is he more worried about these plastic bags, which can be annoying?
I haven't spoken to him directly, but my guess would be the home rule. I think this is the second time this week that the governor has kind of put up the home rule local government flag, that he supports them. And it's certainly a shift from Governor Kasich, who, you know, local governments felt like they were always under attack during his administration. And, you know, this is just the latest issue in a long string of issues where the local governments say, you know, we want to be able to make the best decision for our community without the state interference.
Well, the grocers argue that, look, I have stores in many communities, and now I'm going to have to figure out which store gets the paper ones, which store gets the plastic ones. It's going to cost me more money. Should it be a statewide effort, or should the local communities do it?
Well, we're having a huge fight up in Cuyahoga County already. The Cuyahoga County Commissioners or Council passed it, the ban, and then the Cleveland City Council came and put a moratorium on the ban. So you know, it's going to have to be. You know, I'm in favor of local control. I think Mike DeWine is absolutely correct on this, and I think, you know, you can't do it just issue by issue. So if you believe in local control, you have to believe in local control on plastic bags too.
And local entities have all kinds of different ordinances, beer sales, liquor sales, I mean, that you have to adapt to depending where you're doing your business.
It's a good idea to ban these bags. I like the bags. You know, they're great for picking up.
We all get them.
Picking up after the dog. I put them in my bathroom wastebasket. I use it for lunch.
But you know, the broader issue again was an environmental issue, and you know, and so how do you address that? And I would like localities to have the ability to be creative in how they address the issue, and whether it's a ban, whether it's actually better recycling, more opportunities for people to dispose of them in other ways or whatever. And so I think the legislature should be saying, look, we have different communities. They may come up with somewhat different ideas beyond a simple ban. Let's let them work on it.
And they may come up with an idea that everyone else wants to follow as a result.
Yeah.
Well, to the community's point, the state's not doing anything to actually regulate bans or anything innovative like you know, Herb was just mentioning. So why put the ban on the ban? Did I say that right? The ban on the ban, if you're not going to propose an actual solution to the problem the communities are trying to solve.
All right, let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots. Marianne Sharkey, we'll start with you.
Well, I would say that this has been sort of a bust of a season for the Cleveland Browns.
Sort of.
But I think they'll win at least one more game.
Oh.
I'll really put myself out there.
Play the Bengals one more time.
Yes, right.
Herb.
Now you've got me on the football. Well, after tomorrow night, the Buckeye football team will be in the Final Four. And after watching the Buckeye basketball team play North Carolina, many of us can start aspiring that the basketball team will be in the Final Four. Please don't let me have jinxed them.
Yeah, they beat North Carolina.
Yeah.
Kathy.
Well, I'll go back to the legislature. We're going to get a recommendation next week on new report cards, and the legislature's gone back and forth on this, giving A through F grades to local schools or not. I think they're going to take them away once again.
All right.
Stay tuned.
And Jackie.
Michigan, our neighbor to the north, began recreational marijuana sales on Sunday. And with 3 shops open for most of the day, they sold $225,000 worth of stuff. And I talked with one of the shop owners the other day and said a steady stream of customers has been from Ohio. So I predict that we'll start debating that issue here in Ohio, but I don't know that it's going to change anytime soon.
All right. My off-record comment to Columbus Mayor Michael Coleman's spotty track record on taking flyers on presidential candidates took another hit this week. Just about a month ago, he endorsed Kamala Harris for president. And of course, she dropped out this week. If you look way back to 2003, he was one of the first guys to endorse Wesley Clark as a Democrat for president, and he withdrew about 2 months later. But to give the mayor credit, in 2006, I believe, or 2007, he endorsed Barack Obama for president, well ahead of folks who were endorsing Hillary Clinton. So he got that going for him. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, and you can see each episode on demand at our website, wosu.org/COTR. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.